Have you ever witnessed a billionaire's arrogance crumble in seconds? Billionaire woman yells at black waiter. He says something that silences the entire restaurant. Did you touch my purse with those filthy hands? Do you know how much that costs? Victoria Blackwood's shrill voice cut through the sophisticated atmosphere of La Pearl restaurant like a razor, instantly silencing every conversation. 26-year-old Daniel Santos stood motionless next to table 17, holding the silver tray he had just used to serve the billionaire heiress $1,200 dinner. His calm eyes contrasted sharply with the chaos that had erupted around him. Victoria's Hermes bag had slipped from the arm of her chair just as Daniel was passing by, and reflexively, he had caught it before it hit the floor. A gesture of kindness that now turned into her public humiliation. Just look at him, Victoria continued, pointing at Daniel as if he were an object. He's probably never seen a bag that costs more than his 10-year salary. And now he's drooling, wondering what it would be like to own something like this. La Pearl, considered one of the 5 most exclusive restaurants in New York, had never witnessed such an embarrassing scene. Multi-millionaire customers put down their cutlery. Executives stopped talking on the phone, and even the pianist hesitated on the keys. Daniel had only been working there for 3 months, but all the employees already knew his story. A Columbia University business graduate with top honors. He had lost his corporate job after reporting financial irregularities at his former company. Now, while looking for a new opportunity, he was waiting tables to pay the rent on his Brooklyn apartment. Mrs. Blackwood, Daniel said for the first time, his voice low but firm. I apologize if I disturbed you. I was just trying to prevent your purse from falling. Victoria laughed contemptuously, turning to the other customers as if she were in a show. Tried to stop me, or did you try to steal it? Everyone knows people like you can't resist when they see something valuable. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze on him. Some sympathetic, some curious, many simply embarrassed. But there was something different in his eyes. A serenity that only exists in those who have weathered far worse storms and discovered that they possess the tools to not only survive but thrive. Get ready for a twist you won't believe. Actually, Daniel replied, adjusting his tie with a natural elegance that made some customers frown. People like me learn early on that true value can't be carried in a bag. Victoria stopped laughing. Something in his tone of voice, his upright posture, the way he didn't lower his eyes even once made her realize that she might have seriously underestimated the person she was trying to humiliate. There, in front of all the looks of contempt and curiosity, Daniel stood firm like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this story of prejudice and determination touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the Black Voices channel to find out how a simple moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for a turnaround that no one would ever forget. Victoria Blackwood was not used to being contradicted, let alone by someone she considered so far below her social status. Daniel's response about true value had caught her off guard, but it only fueled her elitist fury even more. Listen here, waiter, she rose from her chair, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. You think you can lecture me? I move more money in an afternoon than you'll see in your entire life. Daniel remained motionless, but his eyes revealed something Victoria couldn't quite decipher. There was a calmness there that bothered her deeply, as if he knew something she didn't. Manager! Victoria shouted, slamming her hand on the table and making the cutlery clatter. I want this incompetent person fired immediately. And I want to know how a place like La Pearl allows people like this to work here. Richard Petman, the general manager, approached quickly, his face pale with nervousness. Victoria Blackwood was the daughter of one of the largest real estate moguls in the United States, heiress to a $23 billion empire. Her father, Harrison Blackwood, owned 3 buildings on the same avenue where La Pearl was located. Mrs. Blackwood, I apologize for any inconvenience, Richard muttered, sweating visibly. We can resolve this discreetly. Discreetly, Victoria laughed contemptuously. There's nothing discreet about being disrespected by an insignificant employee. Look at him. He probably came out of some slum and now thinks he can talk to me as an equal. The racist words echoed through the restaurant, causing several customers to look away, clearly uncomfortable. But Daniel showed no sign of emotional distress. In fact, something strange happened. An almost imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am, I truly apologize if my attempt to help caused this misunderstanding," Daniel said, his voice maintaining a respectful tone that contrasted sharply with Victoria's hysteria. "Perhaps it would be best if I stepped aside and let another server take care of your table." "Now you want to run away," Victoria sneered. "Typical. When the going gets tough, people like you always run." It was then that Richard noticed something that made him even more nervous. Daniel Santos was not behaving like an ordinary waiter. His posture, the way he spoke, even the way he held the tray showed a refined education that did not match the profile of the employees they normally hired. "Daniel," Richard muttered discreetly, "maybe you'd better go to the kitchen for a few minutes." But Daniel remained where he was. "Actually, Mr. Peton, I think it would be interesting to clear up a few things right here." Victoria laughed loudly, turning to the other customers as if she were in a show. "Listen to this. He wants to clear things up." A waiter wanting to explain himself to a Blackwood. "It's interesting that you mentioned the surname," Daniel replied calmly. "Because, as it happens, I am very familiar with the Blackwoods' reputation, especially when it comes to questionable practices in their business dealings." Victoria's smile faltered for the first time. Something in Daniel's tone, the way he said questionable practices, sent a chill down her spine. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice had lost some of its previous arrogance. Daniel adjusted his tie again, a gesture that now seemed more natural, as if it were something he always did. "Well, ma'am, working in places like this allows us to meet some very interesting people, executives, auditors, investigators. They all love to talk over dinner." Richard Peton frowned. There was something about the way Daniel spoke that didn't fit at all with the profile of a waiter in financial difficulty. It was as if he were playing a role. "Are you threatening me?" Victoria asked, but her voice trembled slightly. "Not at all," Daniel replied with a genuinely cordial smile. "Just observing that the world is smaller than we think. For example, 3 months ago, I served a table where Mr. Marcus Thompson from the Federal Audit Office was discussing certain ongoing investigations involving construction companies that overcharge for public works." Victoria's blood ran cold. Thompson was the auditor responsible for investigating her father's company. "And last week," Daniel continued, still in that casual tone, "I had the pleasure of serving prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, who was discussing cases of tax evasion in tax havens." Fascinating conversations, I must admit. Victoria sat down slowly, her face losing color. Walsh was the prosecutor who had sent subpoenas to the entire Blackwood family the previous month. "Who are you?" she whispered. Daniel finally smiled openly, and that's when everyone present realized that something extraordinary was happening. That wasn't the smile of a humiliated waiter. It was the smile of someone who had been 3 steps ahead during the entire conversation. "I'm someone who learned a very valuable lesson when he was unfairly fired from a large bank 3 months ago," Daniel said, slowly removing a card from his uniform's inside pocket. "I learned that sometimes you have to accept humble positions to be in the right place at the right time with the right people." The card he placed on the table made Victoria gasp audibly. It was an FBI card. Economic Crimes Division. Name, Special Agent Daniel Santos. "See how small the world is, Miss Blackwood. During these 3 months of waiting tables, I've had access to the most interesting conversations between people who would never suspect that a simple black waiter could be documenting every word, every accidental admission, every revealing slip." The restaurant had become a silent tomb. Victoria stared at the card as if it were a death sentence. "And you know what else?" Daniel continued, leaning forward slightly. "Tonight, a very important person just committed a serious federal crime right in front of me, in front of dozens of witnesses. Every new humiliation, every racist word Victoria had hurled at him was not only documented by eyewitnesses, it was being recorded by an undercover federal agent who had just received an unwitting confession about information that could completely destroy the Blackwood Empire. What that billionaire Aries didn't know was that every act of racial contempt and arrogance had been the last nail in the coffin of a criminal dynasty that was about to discover that underestimating the right people can cost you much more than money. It can cost you your freedom. Why witness today? Richard Patton, the manager, watched in absolute silence, realizing that he was witnessing the collapse in real time of one of the most powerful families in the country. But that's not all, Washington added grimly. Mrs. Blackwood, while we've been talking here, prosecutors in 3 different states have already issued arrest warrants based on the evidence we've gathered. Your family empire will be dismantled completely. Victoria tried to call her father, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried Theodore. Same result. Marcus Hoffman, the accountant's line was dead. One by one, every contact who could save her was inaccessible. They're all in federal custody, Daniel explained softly. And thanks to today's live broadcast, public opinion has already formed its opinion of the moral character of the Blackwood family. Victoria's cell phone began to ring incessantly. Journalists, television producers, civil rights activists, all wanting statements about the viral video. Each ring was another hammer sealing her social and professional fate. You ruined my life, she whispered, tears beginning to run down her perfectly made-up face. Actually, Daniel replied, adjusting his tie one last time. You ruined your own life. We just documented it. For 3 months, your family confessed to crimes out loud, believing the black waiters were too invisible to matter. Washington signaled discreetly, and 2 agents approached the table. Ms. Blackwood, we need to go. There are many accusations waiting to be addressed, and the public is very interested in your explanations. Wait, Victoria pleaded, grabbing Daniel's arm. You don't understand. I can change. I can make donations, support causes. I can make up for it. Daniel looked at her hand on his arm, then into her desperate eyes. Ma'am, for 40 minutes, you treated me as if I were your property. Now faced with the consequences, you want to negotiate. This only confirms that you do not truly understand the gravity of your actions. Victoria was escorted away by the agents while other customers discreetly filmed with their cell phones. Her walk of shame through La Pearl restaurant would be documented from multiple angles, adding more fuel to the media firestorm she had created. The beauty of modern justice, Daniel murmured to Washington as they watched Victoria being led away, is that it no longer takes place in courtrooms. It happens in real time in front of witnesses from around the world. Outside, a crowd of reporters waited. Victoria Blackwood, heiress to $23 billion, discovered that all her fortune couldn't buy back her reputation or reverse the broadcast that showed her in her most cruel and prejudiced form. What she didn't know was that Daniel had saved the most devastating revelation for last. Because while she thought she had lost only money and status, she was about to discover that her actions that night would trigger social changes that would forever change how billion-dollar companies treat employees, and that the young waiter she had despised had a personal story that would make his revenge even more poetic and complete. 6 months later, Daniel Santos was in the FBI headquarters in New York finalizing the report that would definitively close the Blackwood case. Through the window, he watched the city bustle, a city that had witnessed one of the most spectacular falls in American business history. Blackwood Industries had been completely dismantled. Harrison Blackwood Sr. had been sentenced to 23 years in prison for racketeering, money laundering, and tax fraud. Theodore Jr. had received 16 years for insider trading. Accountant Marcus Hoffman had been sentenced to 15 years for falsifying federal documents. Victoria Blackwood, the heiress who had humiliated Daniel that night at La Pearl, received the heaviest sentence of all, 25 years for aggravated hate crimes, extortion, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The viral video of her racist outburst had become court evidence, demonstrating her character and predisposition to crimes motivated by prejudice. The live broadcast changed everything, Daniel explained to a group of new agents in training. It wasn't just about documenting financial crimes. It was about showing society how systemic racism works at the highest levels of society. What Daniel had never revealed publicly was his personal connection to the case. 20 years earlier, when he was only 6 years old, his family had been evicted from a small rural property in the countryside after Blackwood Industries bought the land through fraudulent court proceedings. His father, an honest black farmer, had lost the plantation that had supported 3 generations of the Santos family. The stress of the eviction and subsequent bankruptcy caused the heart attack that killed his father at the age of 42. Daniel grew up in urban poverty, raised alone by his mother, who worked double shifts as a domestic worker to pay for his education. Every racist word Victoria uttered that night, Daniel continued to the agents, echoed 2 decades of injustices my family had suffered in silence. But instead of seeking personal revenge, I channeled that pain into serving justice. The operation had resulted in the recovery of $450 million in criminal assets, which were redistributed to the Kuala communities and rural families harmed by the corporation over decades. The Santos family was one of the beneficiaries, receiving the deed to their ancestral lands, plus compensation that allowed Daniel's mother to retire with dignity. Victoria, who once owned mansions in 5 different states, now shared a 2-square-meter cell with a prisoner convicted of drug trafficking. His $23 billion inheritance had been completely confiscated by the Internal Revenue Service. No assets, no influential contacts, no power to buy elite lawyers. The irony, Daniel smiled discreetly, is that she is in the same state prison where my cousin was unjustly convicted 10 years ago for a crime he did not commit. The system she helped keep corrupt now prosecutes her with the full force of the law. Richard Petman, the manager of La Pearl, had been promoted to general manager after bravely testifying against Victoria. The restaurant experienced a 300% increase in patronage, with people visiting specifically to see where social justice had been served live for the whole world to see. The story inspired significant legislative changes. Congress passed the Santos Bill, establishing harsher penalties for crimes of discrimination in commercial establishments and creating a federal fund to protect workers who are victims of racial harassment by influential customers. You have to understand, Daniel told the new agents, that the real victory wasn't seeing Victoria in prison. It was discovering that my dignity was never for sale, even when she tried to buy it with public humiliation. Washington, his supervisor, nodded proudly. Daniel had received 3 promotions in 6 months, becoming the youngest agent to head an economic crimes division in FBI history. Universities vied to offer lectures on his case, which became a benchmark in law and business schools. The biggest lesson, Daniel concluded, organizing the final case files, is that those who try to diminish others always reveal more about their own weaknesses than about those they attack. Victoria thought she was proving her superiority. In fact, she was documenting her own destruction. Today, Victoria Blackwood wakes up at 5 in the morning in a federal prison, cleans toilets for $2 a day, and eats meals prepared by cooks who earn less in a year than she spent on a purse. Daniel Santos wakes up in his own apartment in Manhattan, directs investigations that protect millions of Americans, and inspires young black men never to accept being treated as inferior. She tried to teach me my place, Daniel murmured, putting away the last document from the case. She ended up learning hers. The best revenge is not to stoop to the level of those who put us down. It's to rise so high that they can't reach us to hurt us again. Have you ever faced prejudice that tried to define your limits? Leave a comment about how you overcame those barriers. Subscribe to the Black Voices channel for more stories that prove that dignity always wins over arrogance and that sometimes justice just needs a little help from us to work perfectly.